First though, let's get a quick look at how things are looking in the fields. Corn has reached 90% harvested, still a few points behind the 5-year average of 93%. Soybean harvest continues moving at a snail's pace. It's currently at 91%, and that's behind the 5-year average of 96%. Here to discuss the role weather has played in this year's harvest and what could be in store for us is DTN Senior Ag Meteorologist Bryce Anderson. Bryce, thanks for being here.
Certainly.
Let's start with harvest. Weather always plays a role in it, but what were some specific events this year that really impacted things?
Well, I think the biggest harvest feature weather-wise by far is just the round of rainfall that took place in September and October, and just complicated things all over the place. And we're still dealing with the kind of impact that rain had, because it put producers anywhere from a month to possibly 6 weeks behind schedule on getting things taken care of. And I know that there has been some crop loss likely. That still is to be tabulated, but the kind of stress that it brought on machinery and producers and the whole system was just almost beyond description, considering the pervasive round of rain and cold that we had, or particularly rain. And so that is by far the biggest feature for me when we think about the 2018 harvest.
How would you compare the weather that farmers experienced this year to past years?
Well, there certainly are some similarities to what happened a year ago in 2017. I mean, we had some pretty stormy conditions in 2017 a year ago that caused some harvest loss, and it wasn't all that great until we kind of got into the latter part of the fall season. And so we're pretty much dealing with that again. And the growing season itself had some resemblances to last year also, especially during July and August, because the first half of the summer was very hot here this year, the last part of May through the first half of June. And then late June, things got milder, and July and August were pretty much below normal on temperatures with several rounds of rainfall. So there were some similarities to a year ago. And a couple of years ago, it wasn't quite like that. I think we got along better, particularly at harvest. But there certainly were some real echoes of last year, this year.
So DTN issued its winter forecast last month. What's the big weather story in that forecast?
Well, there's quite a difference between what we are calling for and the NOAA Climate Prediction Center forecast. And the big feature has to do with how an evolving weak El Nino in the Pacific is going to be. In our view, El Nino is going to be weak enough that it is not likely to have a real defining longer-term impact on conditions across Nebraska. And so we're looking for more of an opportunity for the polar vortex to be a feature, kind of like it was here, 4 years ago, something like that, and to give some pretty strong periodic rounds of cold air incursions into the central part of the country, including Nebraska, along with several rounds of snowfall. And we could especially see that when we think about the latter half of the winter season, say from late January through February. And so that could cause some issues with the early start of spring calving season, and it could also complicate hopes for an early start to spring field work next year. And there are some pretty strong cold winters that are maybe lining up or did line up to the way we think this winter is lining up, and they do include 1977-78 and 2009-2010. And those were some pretty cold winters also.
El Nino and La Nina are always terms that are mentioned this time of year. Do you see either of those features playing a role in our forecast?
Well, the water temperatures in the Pacific here as we get into the first half of November are moving toward the temperature threshold that indicates a weak El Nino position or a weak El Nino category. They're right around 1 degree Celsius along the equator west of South America toward the international date line. The forecasts that have been issued call for that temperature feature to pretty much be in place through the winter season. So a weak El Nino if it lasts and if it continues on, that's where we're going to see it. Now for the water temperatures to switch to a colder trend and for a La Nina to form, it's kind of, it's certainly not impossible. It would be out of character for the Pacific because a lot of times, usually, those water temperatures develop their characteristic of either El Nino warm or La Nina cool during the latter part of the calendar year and then kind of reach their intensity during the first quarter of the following year. So I think that a La Nina development is pretty unlikely the way things are looking.
So as we wrap up, you've written about the record-breaking rainfall that producers dealt with this fall, and it's possible one reason for that is climate change and its impact on the jet stream. Could you explain what you mean by that and how that could impact us in the years ahead?
Well, there's been quite a bit of research now done on the hypothesis that the high degree or high level of warming that we have seen in the upper latitudes in the far north has led to a decrease in the temperature difference between the mid-latitudes where we are in Nebraska and then the far northern latitudes, and that differential being being a lower differential actually leads to the jet stream not being as consistent and having more of a wavy characteristic to it. And when that happens, you can get weather patterns that develop and just kind of remain locked in place over a sustained period of time. And that's, I think, what we have seen. And that has been identified as a possible feature on some other tremendous rounds of rainfall and heat waves around the globe. With this quite possibly being a feature, I think that the potential for a continued round of extreme weather to deal with on the part of producers is pretty high, it's pretty strong, and that of course just puts more stress on our year-to-year production system.
Meteorologist Bryce Anderson, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Troy.